Here we go. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our McThrows webinar. We've got Joe Frontier, coach at Madison Memorial High School and with the Madison Throws Club. He's going to talk about choosing a technical model for your throwers. A little business we got to take care of first here. Shout out to MF Athletic. Rob Lasorza there, also known as Everything Track and Field. Rob is a great benefactor of the throws. If you need any equipment, once we get this thing started again, throwing equipment, any kind of track and field equipment, he is a great guy to deal with. This is us, McThrows.com. That's our website. We're on Twitter, Facebook. On Instagram, it's under my name, DJ McQuaid. My name is Dan McQuaid. I'm a high school throws coach and English teacher in the suburbs of Chicago. You'll also hear the voice of Roger Einbecker and possibly his dogs. He is also a throws coach in the suburbs of Chicago. And you'll hear Joe's voice in just a couple of minutes. But so we do our best to cover the throws and promote the throwing events and knowledge about the throwing events. So please check out our website. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're associated with MacThrowVideo.com, which is the site that Jerry McAvoy runs with all those great videos on there. So check that out also, and you can actually find us on his page. Hey, next week, our next webinar, we're going to have the coach of Daniel Stull, formerly the coach of Gerhard Cantor, 2008 Olympic champion. Daniel Stull, the current world champion in the discus. Viestein Hofstein's son, and I'm sure I'm messing up his name. I had the pleasure of interviewing him yesterday, and he tried to coach me up in how to say at least his first name. And I've been practicing, but I think you'll probably recognize him. He is one of the great throws coaches in the world, and he's going to break down a throw that Daniel made at the Stockholm Diamond League meet last year, a big foul of 72.95. Viestein is going to go frame by frame kind of on that throw and break it down. So please join us. Check out McThrows.com to register. I think Jerry's got a registration opportunity there on MacThrow Video. So we'd love to have you join us. Here's our guy for tonight, Joe Frontier. Great, great coach. Again, he's at Madison Memorial High School, and he runs also the Madison Throws Club, a fantastically successful club there in beautiful Madison, Wisconsin. Through those two outlets, he has produced 44 state champions, and he's had throwers go on in college to win 8 NCAA titles in the throws. He also, I don't know how he finds the time to do this, but he runs he produces a podcast, sensational stuff for throwing fans. He's had, as you can see here, Ryan Whiting, Kelsey Card, Danny Stevens. He's had Tom Walsh on there. He's had Ashley Kovacs. Just many, many, many heavy-duty hitters in the field of throwing. So please follow him at Throw Big, Throw Far. And he's got some other things that he does through that he's going to talk about. Joe, are you ready to take over?
Well, I'll give it my best shot.
All right, here we go. Wait, let me stop. I got to stop my sharing. Okay. You want to try it?
I'm coming.
Bam, there we go. Hey, don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you can submit questions through the Q&A function throughout this presentation. Roger will read those questions and feed them to Joe. So anytime a question pops in your head, please submit it. Joe, it's all you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Roger. You better work on that name pronunciation before next week.
A little bit more challenging than your name. So thank you for having a simple name.
Thanks, Dan. So yeah, I coach at Madison Memorial High School. I've been there for 20 years. I started Madison Throws Club with Luke Sullivan a long time ago, and then Luke kind of transported out to Arizona and coaches and trains and runs a business out there. And so Madison Throws Club has been around for 18 years now. And then throwbigthrowfar.com, I can't find any more time to be next to a circle. I have some small kids in my life and a wife and a family. And so Throw Big Throw Far allows me to do like video analysis and coach some kids that I can coach after my kids go to bed, basically. A lot of the YouTube videos that I'm gonna, or the videos I'm gonna show you today are all on YouTube. They're all free, and lots more. And so I enjoy putting videos out there of my own kids so they can watch each other, whether they're from my high school or from my club, but also alumni, so college kids that went through the program, so that the younger kids can kind of see what they're up to. And then the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I've been putting technical models up, kind of for my own reference for my throwers. And I hope that you'll find those helpful today, and we'll figure out a way to get those to you if you're interested, or you just go to Madison Throws Club on YouTube. And then, like Dan mentioned, the Throw Far podcast I've been doing for a couple of years now, and I've had a lot of fun learning from other coaches and other throwers and having conversations. And if that's something that interests you, I hope you'll enjoy those as well. Please ask questions along the way. I'm happy to answer anything. I'll do the best I can. I don't know everything. To learning, maybe we have a discussion, or if there's something I skip over or need clarification, feel free to shout that out. Whenever I speak, I'm hard pressed to say, hey, here's all the things I know. I figured it all out on my own. First of all, thanks to Dan and Roger. But to the litany of coaches that I've had to thank is long, including my very first throws coach, my high school coach, Bruce Hammond, who's up here in the top left corner. He passed away a couple of years ago, and he was an absolute mentor. And we all have had those coaches in our lives that are kind of foundational in the people that we become and the things that we do. And so I'd be remiss to not mention his name when I present. But also I think about the coaches that I get to coach with. So my coaching peers, I'm constantly learning from the people that I work with. And there's too many to mention, but I included a couple pictures in here. And my athletes, I really want to thank them. I crossed out my and say our. I collaborate. Corinne Franz is an assistant coach as well at my high school, and she's an alumni from both Memorial and my club, and she coaches with me. Scott Bennett has been volunteering since he's kind of quasi-semi-retired. Shout out to Scott Bennett. And Madison Throws Club is an absolute collaboration with many coaches, lending a helping hand to coach the number of kids that are in the club. But also when I think about our athletes, I'm also often sent kids from other coaches. And so, if I say, 44 state champions, those kids have come through club, but, someone else is coaching them during the season if they're not from my high school. And so, those aren't just my kids, they're our kids. And then my wife and family. My wife is, as all of us know, if we have a spouse, whether or not we coach one sport or multiple sports, she's just super supportive of my crazy passion for the throw. So thanks to those people. We're going to talk about technical models today, just so we're all on the same page. Technical model. Exemplar. I teach art, so throwing a little Da Vinci in here for us. This is the Vitruvian man, is kind of the perfectly proportioned human, which we're going to find out is a misnomer. We're not going to be able to find the perfect thing today, but I hope to give you some clues so that you can kind of make the best sense out of it. Technical models can be visual, verbal, or in writing, and we're going to talk a lot about the visual, but there are other ways we can get information to our athletes and hopefully they respond. Everyone learns in different ways. Learning different ways. I learned a lot personally when I was a high school thrower. I learned on feel. I was in the ring and kind of like, oh, that felt good, that didn't feel good. I think there are a lot of kind of athletes who have that experience. Some are tactile, where, we'll have to figure this out when we can actually uncoronavirus ourselves and we kind of shift into a new world, is getting in the circle and actually moving kids into different positions, or using other things that are tactile, sticking a PVC pipe over their shoulders, having them kick a cone. Other things that are tactile are ways that they learn, but often kids are learning visually, so they're looking and trying to mimic something that they see. Our kids learn through repetition. and they're trying to repeat things that they see, and they're trying to emulate those. So what is it that they're trying to emulate? Is it coaching demonstrations? My coach, and we'll come back to this, Bruce Hammond, played football in college, and I had a brief stint with the Minnesota Vikings. And by the time he was my coach, you know, his knees and hips really didn't allow him to do a lot of things in the ring. He was an incredible communicator of ideas, but was not able to demonstrate for me. As I get older, I find myself demonstrating less. I'll drill a lot, but kids are always trying to get a shot put in my hand. I say, Dan, you feel me on that?
Oh yeah.
You know, I think the first time I ever, you know, saw something written about the throws going way back, there weren't photos in the book. It was like these black outline drawings, and I still know that there's a bunch of those out there. I just had a conversation in an upcoming podcast with Coach Brian Bedard from Colorado State, and he basically learned from a book that was full of drawings of outlines of stick figures. Photos of positions. The best one that I have come up with at practice is the kids that have figured some things out because they've been around longer than the younger kids. I will use them as examples, and they'll demonstrate things. They'll get in and move, you know, their teammates around in the circle and try to get them into better positions. And then the last one, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this, is video, and the proliferation of the availability of video, I think, is amazing and bad all at the same time, and we'll come back to that concept. So back to Coach Hammond. He wasn't a demonstrator at practice. He tried his best, and he was a hell of an athlete in his day, but he struggled kind of getting into positions the way he wanted to, and that was frustrating for him. He vocalized that. He's like, damn it. Swore a lot, all in a good way, never at somebody, but about things. I put a question mark here because he wasn't able to do that for me. I'm speaking specifically about my high school interaction. I went to Racine Case High School a long time ago in the 90s. And there weren't really any older throwers. There was one senior who was pretty darn good my freshman year, and he never came to practice. So every once in a while, I'd kind of get a glimpse of him. And when I think about that, it probably changed my high school kind of learning curve, because my high school coach gave me a lot of attention, and there was another freshman who was pretty interested in throws too. And I was way over the top about figuring out a way. I'd thrown a little bit and kind of was self-taught in middle school. And then when I actually had a coach, I kind of ate up everything he said. And so to get a lot of attention because I wasn't in a big group and there weren't older throwers that were, you know, lots better that you know, deserved or had earned a lot of the coach's time, it was really helpful. What set me on the motion of really watching what other throwers do, professionals, is Coach Hammond gave me a VHS tape of Randy Madison. And if you're not, let's say, if you're not older than 45, you might not know who Randy Madison is, but kind of one of the American stalwarts in the throws in the late 60s and 70s. And I wore that thing out. You know, there was no YouTube. And so I had this tape, and I had this Randy Madison tape, and I watched that thing over and over and over again. And when I say I wore it out, literally, the tape like popped off, little round white cassette, you know, the reel on one side, and I couldn't watch it anymore. So, you know, I learned a lot from watching Randy Madison. This is important to me. You know, I put a lot of YouTube videos out there, and I have a podcast, and I hope that I really make an effort to kind of carefully choose my words. I don't know everything. I'm really interested in continuing to learn and evolve. And everything I'm about to say is just my interpretation of what I'm seeing. I don't coach these throwers. You know, I've had the opportunity to meet some throwers and ask lots of questions and talk with some, you know, of the best coaches in the world. But even that doesn't give me the right to say, hey, you know, look at Joe Kovacs, he should do this, and if he did it, it would be better. So, you know, these are my interpretations, and I hope they're helpful. And with that going forward, I'm going to try to speak in the, I think you should try, rather than this is the way to do it, because I don't know if there's one specific way. So
Tyler said he made it.
Oh, good. So here's the second disclaimer is, Tyler, thanks for coming. Tyler said, what were you guys thinking having a webinar at the same time as the NFL draft? Don't you know there hasn't been a sport on television for 2 months? So everyone who's here, thanks for watching. I know that you have other options.
I don't think there's any choice there. That's not a hard choice.
That's right.
We hope. You can read the list of who got drafted. It's a lot of pomp and
Exactly.
circumstance, right? So here's Randy Madison, and this clip was in the VHS tape. Now it's on YouTube, which is nice. And you know, this is where I kind of started my freshman year. I tried to do a bunch of Randy Madison stuff. So really simple and clean outside of the fact that he did a drop-in start, a little bit of an advanced maneuver there, dropping in. Long left arm, trying to keep the left arm out of the back. Tries to land, at least in my interpretation again. Gets both feet down at the same time. Does a really good job of pulling the right foot underneath. Leaves the ball back forever. You know, everything's moving except the ball when he gets to power position. And then that jump, reverse, switch your feet, finish. And for a while, that's kind of more or less what I was trying to do. I was trying to emulate using Randy Madison as a technical model. So my freshman year in high school was 1989. So that's a couple of years ago. And fast forwarding, when I started coaching high school, I coached a lot like my high school coach did. I thought, you know, hey, I love my experience. I learned a lot from my throws coach. Coach Hammond was a glide technician, never spent a day trying to rotate, didn't even talk about it at practice. And we spent probably 80% of our time gliding and 20% like searching for a discus that we could throw once in a while. That was kind of the breakdown of practice. And I became a pretty good shot put technician. And I was an average discus thrower at best at the high school level. So and I knew that I would need to kind of shore up my discus knowledge. And that was a real, like, right away when I started coaching, I realized that I needed to do a lot more investigating about discus knowledge. And I had picked up some between high school and when I started coaching at Memorial. My first year coaching at Memorial was 2000, so 20 years ago. I thought I would need a technical model. So, hey, let's try Randy Madison. And, you know, going back to this video, I didn't have access to this video, but I found a book that had like this frame by frame photographs. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So it was like 10 photographs of him kind of paused at all these spots. And what I realized and started remembering as I was looking at the photographs is that by my senior year, I really wasn't throwing anything like Randy Madison. I had stopped dropping in, so I wasn't dropping in. And Madison barely draws his left leg. Look at how, you know, so he's just, this is all like right leg push out of the back to get him to the front. And I'm 6 feet when I have shoes on, so I'm 5'11", and I was struggling to get across the ring. Dropping in helped, but I found that dropping in, I was less consistent at arriving at power position when I dropped in. And so what I started doing was just being in this lower position, shoulders over my knee, and I added a draw, a T and a draw. And then the other thing that I noticed about Madison is he pushed off the toe. So I was really surprised that he get that far across the ring with no T, no kick really, and he's pushing off the toe. So instead of, you know, this kind of the classic kind of maybe rolling up on this toe and then literally rolling back onto the heel and using the quad to kind of explode off the heel. The heel's the last thing touching. He doesn't do that. He's pushing off the toe. And so that was kind of like, oh yeah, I stopped doing that as well. He lands flat foot in the middle, which I think is kind of a trademark of people who push off the toe. If you watch like Li Xiaogong, world champion, female thrower from China, she pushes off the toe and she lands semi-flat foot in the middle. She's a short, long glide shot putter. And so, it worked for Madison. He threw 70 feet. Gong's thrown 68 feet in the shot. And then the last thing I noticed in the freeze frame was by here, sorry, and let's pause, but by here he's already turned his foot, but that initial landing in his reverse, he kind of lands with his toe still pointed at the throw rather than this right hip, the stripe of this side of his pants disappearing because that right hip has eclipsed kind of parallel. And so that was something that I thought that I could do better because I had figured out some things along the way. So,
Joe,
yeah.
could you have helped the couple people in the group with a description of short, long, and long, short gliders?
Sure. So a long, short glider is going to have kind of this massive explosion out of the back. And when they arrive at power, typically what will happen is this right foot will land probably 3 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches past the center point and have a much smaller base. And then you have your short longs who are like Madison, leaving this right leg. He's pulling the right leg. It's underneath him. His knee's over the toe, his head, the ball's straight. If you drew a straight line, the ball is over the knee, is over the toe. But he's got a really wide base. And so, the long, short throwers will typically turn the right foot a lot more at power position. And short, long throwers will have this kind of like catapult where they're a little bit like a teapot and there's this kind of rocking from the right, transfer power into the left block leg and go up and over the block leg instead of turning the right foot at power. Roger, is that a fair, rough description of those two things?
Yeah, I think there was a couple people who needed some clarification for that, so.
Yeah, I think that's something that gets glazed over maybe more now because a lot of people I think are rotating. We'll talk about rotation. But there are a lot of throwers who are very successful with a big wide base in power position as glide shot putters. And there are plenty of examples of throwers who are pulling that right foot really far underneath them and trying to turn and work the ground when they arrive at power. And so, it could, I would say personal preference, but we're going to get into what are athletes good at, what can they do and what can't they do. And you're going to find that some athletes will have a hard time getting the right foot past the center of the circle. And so
it may even be a little bit of a different issue for high school throwers that may not have the strength to enable them to get across the ring so far. So it is
like the hip mobility out of that start position, sometimes the strength and mobility of the hips out of the back will not allow an athlete to get very far across the ring. And you do one of two things: you move them close to the toe board, or with the constant concept of trying to get them to glide further and further through drills and specific strength exercises, and repeat glide drills, and single leg squats, and all sorts of things that'll help them cover more distance eventually, hopefully. So I tracked down a video of Al Feuerbach. Probably like, this is old video, you guys, but and this is pre-YouTube, so 2001, 2002, I'm thinking, like, I'm not going to show them Feuerbach because I ended up not throwing like that. Obviously, Madison, because I didn't end up throwing like that. So you've got Feuerbach, shorter athlete, super powerful. I think he was a national weightlifting champion as well. Roger, can you check me on that?
That's correct.
And so these kind of classic positions, here's this tee and draw, big kick, coming off the heel instead of the toe, pulls the right leg underneath, left foot down just a little bit late, stays on the ball of his foot, big right foot turn, big chest, triple extension, and a reverse. And this is where I'm talking about that hip kind of getting all the way through the finish and reverse. And it's almost shocking. You look at the Madison video where he kind of has this, not really finished reverse, and it's amazing that he threw that far. But you got to think, I'm not holding anything against Madison. I think about the evolution of throws and what we knew, and Feuerbach probably seeing Madison and building off of that concept, just like the throwers today are riding on the shoulders of the throwers that came before them. And so I think we can keep pushing things forward if we're pulling the right pieces out of some of these throwers as we move forward. When I think about Feuerbach, I think about power, and we'll get into a video later where we see Timmerman, who looks like he's moving twice as fast as this Feuerbach video, which just, that's full speed. Actually, that second one was a little slower. This one's slower. This first one's full speed. It looks fast, but it's not super fast. This is half speed. And this is quarter speed with pauses at these kind of seminal moments. And we'll keep talking about these foundational positions. So draw, kick, extend off the heel, pull the right leg back, leave the shoulders back, right foot touchdown, left foot touchdown, right foot turn, left arm open, extension, release, reverse. So we'll come back to more of that. It made sense, as I was trying to learn rotational throws, because I never did it myself. Hey, I'm gonna look at the guy who set the world record. So Randy Barnes seemed like the logical one. And Barnes, I think, is still a good technical model. Even though, we'll talk about how much all of these guys we're talking about are absolute outliers. But I picked up some kind of like, hey, these are things that I know about the discus, and how is he applying them to the shot? This pre-turning of the left foot, long left arm out of the back, wide sweep at entry, right foot touchdown is turned. Something that I never really had to think about in discus is where's the right foot, or in the glide shot is where's the right foot turned to. In the glide we're just trying to turn it 90 degrees and then get another 90 degrees when we get to power. And we've got to get it further. So here he is landing right foot touchdown. Really small base. I think that's the most shocking thing. If you watch Barnes throw, has this tiny, tiny power base, and then this massive vertical attack, which in recent conversations with Tom Walsh and Ryan Whiting, and if you watch some of the rotators today, it's less about vertical attack and a little bit more about staying, flatter on the finish, which is interesting because these guys are sneaking up on his world record, and they're thinking about different things than I'm thinking Barnes is. Again, those are my interpretations. So looking at this list of like, what do I find important at each one of these moments in the throw? And if I kind of skip ahead here to where we start pausing at places, big pre-left turn, low shin angle, wide right, long left arm, turning the right, trying to keep the shoulder square to the finish. Here's right foot touchdown, ball's way back, tiny base, long left arm, right foot never stops turning, the heel never touches. Now he's going up, 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 big jump. And I can't remember exactly, but I think this is a ridiculously long practice throw. Like I want to say,
he had many of those.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's an American theme here. I needed a discus model, and Matt Wilkins seemed like a logical choice as well. Again, this is 2001, 2002. I'm, in my early 20s coaching high school kids that I'm only a couple, 4 or 5 years older than the seniors. And I like Wilkins. Wilkins, looking at kind of the history of the throws, you think about what Order did, Al Order, and then Jay Sylvester, and I think Wilkins kind of built off of what Sylvester had figured out. And, Wilkins and Wolfgang Schmidt become friends, and they're kind of tinkering around with each other's technique. And I think they pushed the discus a whole bunch forward. So long wind, pre-left turn, we saw that in the rotational shot. Wilkins, I love how he's stacked over the left side in the back. Watch that again in a second here. Right there. Left armpit over left knee over left toe. Wide sweep. This really aggressive, like low shin angle lean, I think is what really separated Wilkins and Schmidt from the throwers that came before him. Is now we can access all these throws. We can start looking at their throws on YouTube for the last 10 years where, we can see almost everything and start comparing kind of the lineage of where some of this movement came from. And when you think about, if you go back and look at Order, it looks pedestrian. It has that feel of Madison where it's almost, oh, isn't that nice? It's a pleasant throw. And then, Wilkins and Schmidt really look like these just absolute aggressors. Look at how the shin angle and how much he's leaning into the ring for this big sprint across the ring. Discus high and back, really high, lots of separation. Shoulders square to the back of the ring at left foot touchdown at power position. And then a vertical attack, really vertical, really aggressive, up, 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 up. And Schmidt did the same thing, or similar, I shouldn't say same. Long wind, stacked left, wide sweep, low shin angle, lean, sprint, separation, high point the discus, left foot touchdown, shoulder square to the back of the ring, right foot never stops turning and up, up and away. This big vertical attack at the finish. So I got my hands on a lot more video, I don't know, 15, 16 years ago, 2004. I think Pat Ebel, who was the UW Oshkosh coach and is now the Auburn throws coach and has done an amazing job with the athletes at every level, Division III and Division I, has done phenomenal things. He was at Penn State for a while, worked with some of the best throwers in the world. And Pat gave me a bunch of video clips, and I started looking at Timmerman. And Timmerman compared to Feuerbach, now don't get me wrong, Timmerman's incredibly strong, really strong. But I think about speed. This first video, this looks like he shot out of a cannon. And compared to the Feuerbach video, it's just lots faster. Here it is 50%. So again, we see him teeing and drawing similar to Feuerbach. Long left arm, he pushes off the heel the same. Wider base than Feuerbach, still lands on the ball of his foot. But so the wider base was the big change here. And this big load the toe and roll to the heel. I don't know if you guys noticed that at the start. But he's going to come up off his heel as he draws this knee, and he's all the way on his toe. He's just kind of creating a longer path as he tries to maximize this 7-foot circle. All his weight, the ball's way back here out over the ring, and his weight's over the right. He's going to roll to the back of this heel and create some momentum. And Madsen's momentum came from that dropping in. Timmerman is rolling onto the heel and then pushing off. Pull the right leg underneath. Big hip turn. Ball's still in his hand. And all of a sudden this white stripe's going to disappear at reverse. Fast, fast, fast. So I thought, just from a perspective of Timmerman being a speed thrower and Feuerbach being a power thrower, all of a sudden I thought, well, there's different ways to kind of accomplish this task that we're trying to do. Do I need one technical model, or do I need more than one? And, you know, that's where kind of my thinking really started changing, from thinking, oh, I just need one of these for each guys. I'm going to coach all my throwers the same, all as well. And, you know, I think most of us are probably landed on that. All of our throwers are not made equally, both in talent, size, and what they're good at. And, you know, real simple, not everyone can throw from a wide base. Height is a factor. You're going to have throwers that are 6'4", and you're going to have throwers that are 5'10". You're going to have girls that are 6'1", and you're going to have girls that are 5'2". How can we get them doing things that will help them be successful? This is really starting to push my brain in terms of opening my mind to having a single technical model. I also got my hands on some Lars Riedel video, and I was like, this guy doesn't reverse in competition. I had always reversed, and kind of the American way of the discus was always to jump off the ground at the finish. And when I first started looking at Riedel, I was like, oh, doesn't that hurt? Just smashing into that left side, you know, the left block. Much shorter wind than Wilkins. So the back of the ring doesn't open this up. It's like this simple movement. I'm just going to put the discus there. That's as far back as I can get it, but I'm just going to leave it behind me the whole time. Create this long, long, long path of the discus. And when I get there, I'm just going to stick my left foot in the ground, and I'm going to smash everything on the right side into the left leg, left post, left arm block. So much more upright. When we saw Wilkins, we saw this kind of super dramatic lean into the ring, and he's a little more upright. It's like almost kind and gentle in the back. He's just kind of setting up this big finish. And we'll get to kind of talking about Krauser, you know. He's just setting up this big, gigantic finish in the rotational shot. And Riedel, same thing, a lot of the non-reverse discus throwers. Flatter orbit of the discus, they're not trying to lift up at the end, they're attacking flat. So their discus doesn't have to carry, they're not jumping to raise the height or release. They're just trying to create a long pull, 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 pull.
Joe, one of the things that Riedel does here that reminded me of a comment that John Powell made at one of his camps was he faced the back when he did his initial wind. He didn't turn his hips much, so he didn't have to, you know, he didn't have a weight shift to start and then have to have another corresponding weight shift to get over the left to come out of the back. So it was just a simpler way to start.
100%. And I think, you know, the one thing that I've done with, especially my beginning throwers, is try to simplify their start. I just think the more variables you have in the back of the ring rotationally and in discus, and even for that, you know, dropping in the glide, you know, creates more variables that you're going to have to deal with. But if you can simplify the start, and there's not a ton of shift, and so when we're talking about shift, you know, Wilkins is going to completely, you know, go off of this left leg and go with the discus, right? So all the weight goes to the right, and then he shifts completely back to the left. And for a younger thrower to have that, you know, happen and be perfectly balanced on the left, I think is difficult. So I'll typically have kids kind of sit, shift over the left, and wind the discus back to the right, but still stay over their left leg. And as they get more advanced, they can certainly shift more weight and then get back onto the left as they start rotating and sweeping. But I think, you know, well, one, I love hearing that Powell's interpreting something that I'm interpreting as well. That's good, because I would trust him. But yeah, you know, this idea of just set the thing up. You know, I think when we look at a Krauser throw, and we'll get to that later, but, you know, he's just trying to set up this big, gigantic finish. So why rush through the back and possibly create a variable that you might not get to completion the same way?
And the other thing Riedel prompts in the way of a question is, do you coach any of your kids to a non-reverse finish?
So that is a great question. I teach a lot of non-reverse throws. We spend a lot of time not reversing in practice, and my kids would probably tell you this. You know, if we were competing right now, let's see, it's May 23rd or April 23rd. You know, in normal circumstances, we would be in our third week of outdoor season, second and a half week outdoor season. The first week would have been like snowy and cold, and probably the meet would have gotten canceled. You guys know that? You know about that? Track and
A
field
little
weather?
bit, yeah.
And so a lot of times, everything we do kind of indoor season, discus oriented, whether we're throwing into a net or throwing balls into a wall or throwing cones, will be non-reverse. Even for returning throwers, and then we'll add a little bit of reverse in. And I teach the reverses like, hey, here are the steps to reverse. I think that's really important. From a club coach standpoint, because not all my club kids are coached the same way that I bring my kids through the process, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, is I'll have kids say, oh, you know, we'll get to the finish of the discus throw and they're throwing powers and they reverse. I'm like, hey, stay in non-reverse. And they're like, I can't not reverse. They only can reverse. You know, they won't. They've taught themselves that the jumping part is the most important part. And even if you look at Wilkins, before he's jumping, he's working the ground for such a long amount of time, and then you know the reverse happens. But he spent a lot of time in ground contact, and I think high school kids really struggle with that. They don't turn the right foot; they just want to jump. And so I think it's really important to work on the non-reverse. In terms of competition, I have a lot of girls that throw non-reverse. And I have very few boys that don't reverse, and in competition specifically. And you know, the girls' discus is different. It's lighter, and if you watch the pros, and we'll see some Danny Stevens, some Sandra Perkovic in a minute here, they can throw the discus differently. Those women are tall and long. And they're very strong. And I think about Danny Stevens in particular, she's very flexible, that they don't really need to reverse. They need to basically set up this kind of slingshot and stick their left foot in the mud like Riedel, and then pull the discus, let the rubber band snap. Guys in high school, especially, I think about like freshmen, sophomores, well, I think it would be fantastic to constantly throw non-reverse. I think it's just hard to throw the 1-6 implement effectively without leaving the ground, and they don't understand how to kind of create those forces. And so keeping them in non-reverse as long as possible, and then giving them the reverse, and all of a sudden they feel like, why didn't you let me do this the whole time? They really have to learn how to use the ground before they jump off of it, in my opinion. So we talked plenty about Riedel, I think. So, you know, from a personal standpoint, I already kind of started tipping showing my cards a little bit, but no longer using a one technical model system or being a system coach. And I know there are coaches who coach in a system, try to make their throwers look like, you know, the same. And the coaches who can do that, I think, are amazing. I think that's hard. I think about how talented the best of the best are, and they're not all throwing the same way, you know. And so there must be something to the fact that there are different ways to get the discus or the shot put to go far. And so if we can kind of utilize our throwers' best assets, what can they do and what can't they do, I think we're good to go in a much easier path. And can we show them some technical models that maybe fit their brand a little bit, I think is really important.
Hey, Joe, question from the attendees. Do you teach the reverse as part of a teaching progression for your throwers? And if so, how early do you introduce that?
That is a great question. I would say they hear about the reverse and will go through the progression probably like the second week of indoor season. And the way I do it is their hands are on their hip, and you know they'll be in a kind of a power position. kind of situation where they're kind of weights over their right leg if they're right-handed, hands on their hips. They'll turn the right foot. They'll step the right foot to the left. As they push off the ground, they should push their weight towards the left. Left side block. Left leg gets stiff. The right foot basically steps to the left foot, and then the left foot pulls back. I think oftentimes, Coach Brian Bedard and I were just having a conversation about this, and I've said something to this effect before, is that the reverse is a result of the throw, which is good, but it's fairly complex. Basically, what we're when you're reversing, you're trying to maximize forces off the ground and then get them to transfer to the implement while not falling out of the circle. And so there has to be a transfer of weight into the left leg, into the block leg, into this kind of bracing, stopping mechanism. And so the left leg has to stay on the ground longer than the right does. Anyone who's taught the reverse, or just let a kid reverse and you say, hey, jump and switch your feet, they jump both feet at the same time. And really what we're doing is we're pushing the right leg into the left, transfer of weight happens, the left leg pulls out of the way, right foot comes down. And so there's kind of this systematic thing that's happening, and I think walking kids through that experience, I think, is really critical. Showing kids the reverse and them not really understanding it and then pulling back and keeping them in non-reverse, I think is a good way to find out who's ready to start reversing and who isn't. If you kind of slowly peel back the onion and don't show it to them for 4 weeks, you might have found a kid would have benefited from it and could handle doing it earlier on. So, there's another concept from my experience that you could play around with. Kids have access to everything right now, and I think that is an amazing thing, and I think that's a really bad thing too. Kids can follow the best throwers in the world on Instagram, and so they're probably checking Instagram more than you and I are as coaches. Maybe, I don't know your social media habits out there, but they probably, hey, I just saw this throw from yesterday, or so and so's practice throw from today, and they're watching in real time on Instagram Live. Can we empower them to kind of pay attention and know what they're looking for? Since we probably can't pick out a single technical model that's going to work for all of our athletes, can we start figuring out what are the important parts that me as a coach want my kids to understand? What are the foundational moments in the throw? What do I want my kids generally to look like in the back, at sweep, at entry, shin angle? What direction is the left toe pointed at entry? Where's the right foot touching down? What direction is it pointing at when it touches down? How do I keep my heel off the ground? And so are there technical models? Maybe they're numerous. Hey, I like the way Danny Stevens overemphasizes right foot turn. I like how Sandra Perkovic high points the discus. Can we say, hey, have a practice where we start pointing these things out through these videos so that kids can then watch it and be looking for specific things. Folks who haven't seen my YouTube channel, all of these technical models are all on there. So if you go to Madison Throws Club and you click on playlists, there's a whole playlist of glide shot putters, the best of the best. And so, here's your Timmerman and David Storrell and Feuerbach and Valerie Adams and Michelle Carter and Werner Gunther, and every single one of them is going to have a throw that might be their best, hopefully, or at minimum it's a pretty darn good camera angle where we can see their feet the whole time. A lot of times when they show one throw on NBC of the entire shot put, but they'll show us all half hour of the 10,000 meters or whatever the heck. It probably they run the 10,000 meters faster than that, but it seems like it's going on forever when they show us every second of it. But then show us only the winning throw, and they show us half of it, like the second half of it, because they cut to it late. So I'm trying to pick out the discus, best discus angles, things that we can see and really pick apart these guys and girls who are doing things that are really elite level. So it's all there. It's free. Utilize it, and And I guess in particular, if there's a thrower that you really like, that you share with your kids and you want me to add it to that list, feel free. I do this with all of those throws is, so, you know, the first one's at 100% speed, if I can find it at 100% speed, obviously. And I think it's really important to not just watch throwers in still frame by click, 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 click. I think it's important for kids to see the rhythm of the throw and kind of the speed of the throw. It helps me figure that out when I'm looking at video for kids. I'll watch it at full speed before I start slowing it down and trying to pick things apart. Then it'll show the same throw at 50%, then it'll go down to 25%, and it'll freeze for 2.5 seconds at each kind of one of those kind of foundational moments. Here's the wind. Here's left foot pre-turning, and the right foot's about to come off the ground. Here's what they look like at entry. Here's what they look at right foot touchdown, or sprint, sorry. Right foot touchdown, left foot touchdown, right hip turn, release, reverse if they reverse. So all those will get a frozen frame. And then after that freeze frame thing, it'll go to 50% and play the same thing it did the second shot, and then it'll play it again at full speed. So all those throws are in there. And what I'll end up doing is, I tortured you as coaches and showing you Feuerbach today. If we show a kid that Feuerbach black and white video with all the crap on it, they'll get bored just because it's black and white. I'm telling you right now. If you only coach kids and you don't coach high school kids, don't show any old-timey videos to kids. And it's sad. You're going to have some kids who are maybe way into the throws, and they'll put up with you showing them some Al Order video just so they can understand where we came from. But for the most part, they want to see their contemporary, these people who are throwing right now. And so I would just make sure you're thinking about that. I will tell you this from experience. My throws club group, I would say, is 65-35 girls over boys. And that's purely, I think, a result of, when throws club started, we were very summer based. We would train all summer long. Is kids have football camp, and they have football, 5 days of contact, and they have team camp here and all those things. So I have a lot fewer gentlemen in my group. And the girls definitely don't want to just watch, they don't want to see Darlin Romani, who can bench press a house, throw the shot put, because they know that that's not how they'll be successful rotating the shot put. So finding good examples of women is something that I've always made a big priority. And so it's a good mixture, or I try to keep it a good mixture in the playlist. What I do as a coach personally is, when we're working on something at practice and we might have kind of pounded one specific cue all day long, and, whether they're getting it or not getting it, I might, at the end of practice or when I get home that night, I'll just pull up one of these videos, and I don't say, hey, tomorrow I want you to throw like Joe Kovacs, go. I'll say, hey, watch how Kovacs uses the left arm out of the back of the ring to help create momentum, on the way into the ring. And, if their left arm is, dropping down and pointing down at the ground, I'll say, hey, here's Joe Kovacs clip. I'll text it to him with the link and say, watch the left arm out of the back. And I'm just picking one cue that maybe we pounded all day, and then send them an example of it and say, watch this one particular thing about this throw. And it's a great way to get kids kind of involved in their own learning. And I also think it's not too overwhelming to say, oh, shit, I didn't look anything like that at practice. I suck. I'm quitting, which would be bad. So I just wanted to throw, because, again, I want to be an equal opportunity throws coach, throw some women in here. Discus is really tricky. I love the way Danny Stevens throws. Don't know that we should use her as a technical model. I think she's incredibly flexible, like probably more flexible than most any of our athletes. And so it's hard to say, hey, do it like Danny Stevens does, because I don't know that many kids can do it. She was a world champion at 19, and she threw 229 feet a couple of years ago. Is coming back from an injury and is hoping to do big things next year. What she's crazy good at is separation. Look where the discus is. And she just keeps this thing back forever. And then my favorite thing about her is how exaggerated this right hip turn is going to be right now. Boom. Her hips are pointed outside of the left sector, and that discus just came off of her hand. And how many people have throwers that, you know, they're both hips at power position are facing this cage over here, and then they're wondering why they're throwing in the first panel of the fence. And so, you know, they need to turn this right hip. Hey, let's watch Danny Stevens. Classic one, and I put this in here in particular, I was thinking about a couple kids because I just gave them the same feedback on a video analysis I did, is they carry the discus too low on entry. And so they get to power and the discus is like at their waist at right foot touchdown, and there's no high point, and so the discus isn't helping them get back. And so I think one of the things that Perkovic does crazy, discus goes way up, and this is a hard angle because the camera's actually on the ground, but I know there's camera angles too where the, you know, it's more of a neutral camera height that's at her waist or, you know, chest or head. This discus is really high, and it's going to set it up and kind of create this pendulum where she's going to turn the hip and the discus is just going to follow this orbit back down and then come back up. And her high point is earlier than most. So if you go back and watch Mac Wilkins, his high point is, I don't know, somewhere, if this is the center of the sector, Wilkins' high point is just to the left of the center, and then he throws it basically right down the center of the sector. Her high point's right here, and then watch where this discus goes, right back to where it was. And so getting this, the kids understand if I high point the discus is going to come back down, and a little momentum and pendulum is just going to help me pull this discus straight back up. And if you leave the discus at your waist, you're going to have a hard time lifting the discus up at the finish. And you're going to produce a lot of flat throws. And so, you know, you can find these kind of outliers and utilize them to your advantage. Okay, we're not going to be able to throw like Perkovic, but let's see if we can get the discus to high point a little bit better at right foot touchdown tomorrow at practice. And then, you know, send them the video and say, hey, here's Perkovic at, I don't understand how she turns her left knee like that. That's insane. But these are outliers, right? So can you high point the discus at right foot touchdown? There it is. And, you know, if you kind of create this, you know, glossary of vocabulary with your athletes, then when you say, hey, watch your high point at right foot touchdown in a text, and they click on the link, they know what they're looking for. And I think empowering kids want to know the why of things. And so if they can see it, they can turn it into action, hopefully, at the next practice. Everyone in the world's been talking a lot about this competition right here. And I have talked with Tom Walsh on the podcast about what he was thinking on this day. You should listen to the podcast. He blew my mind a little bit. He was like, with a couple things that he said. Talked to Ashley Kovacs about this meet in particular and what Joe was working on. I haven't talked to Ryan, but heard Ryan on a couple podcasts recently. And you know, here are three guys that throw fairly differently, and they're all successful. And I think that's the takeaway, the big takeaway I hope today is that we don't have to make our kids look like one thing for them to throw far. And one concept is this: if Walsh, Krauser, and Kovacs, they're going to come to practice and say, Walsh, Krauser, Kovacs, I want all three of you to throw exactly like Ryan Krauser for the next year, and let's see who does that best. I'm gonna guess Ryan Krauser. You know, if Ryan Krauser wasn't a thing, I'm gonna guess Krauser would come up on top a year later. And if all three of these guys had to throw like Joe Kovacs, I'm gonna guess Kovacs would be the winner. And if all three of these guys had to throw like Tom Walsh, I'm gonna guess Tom Walsh would crush them. You know, if we had a different name for it, I want you, all three of you, for 1 year to practice, you know, rotational example one. So Krauser, big, wide sweep out of the back, slow. It's not as slow as you think because he's enormous. He's 6'8", but he is a lot slower than Walsh and Kovacs because all he's trying to do is get to the finish and stay on this right foot as long as possible and kind of create this gigantic power throw. And if you notice, he blocks like a glider. you know, because his power position is huge. His power throw his stand throw is enormous. So watch him pull his elbow in at the finish of this throw. He pulls it down and elbow in. And if you watch Walsh and Kovacs, they don't really block with the left arm. They block with the left leg. And so when I think about, well, which one's right? Well, each one is right for these three guys. They came within 1 centimeter of each other, and you know, probably are the three farthest clean throws in history. I can't say that 100%, but probably. So if you watch Kovacs, way faster on the full speed, lots more left arm action out of the back, trying to create some rotational. And then watch this left arm at the finish. It's way out here, no block, because he's rotating. No left arm block. Left leg block, huge. Left leg post. And so I made this video, I don't know, maybe a month ago or so. So here's what these guys look like on top of each other. And you'll notice Kovacs and Walsh are gone already. So they all start at the same point in this video. And Krauser's going to get there last, but they, you know, yearly they all finish in the same spot. The balls almost all go the same direction. Kovacs is the widest out of the back. Walsh is really trying to kind of line things up. His head stays right down the center of the throw the whole time. And then here they are side by side, which is a little bit easier to see. Now here's what I did when I edited this. They're all going to go do the same thing, and then I pause it until Krauser catches up. So Krauser got there last. Pretty similar right here. I mean, here's the crazy thing. They did all that stuff in the back. Kovacs went way out here. Walsh's head stayed in absolutely in the center. And they all arrive in this fairly similar position. You see some different knee angles a little bit, but you know, where the ball is and where their chest is square is pretty similar. Right foot touchdown. Walsh has the highest knee and furthest apart. Krauser, his knees are the closest together. Kovacs is somewhere in between him, probably closer to Walsh than Krauser is certainly. And here, these guys are turning faster. Krauser's trying to be linear here, at least in my interpretation of what he's trying to do. He's just trying to be almost a glide stand thrower at the finish with a whole bunch more momentum in front of it. And then watch their block arms. Block arm like a glider almost. Rotational, rotational. Much ground tact as possible. Walsh is off the ground, his right foot's not touching. Kovacs, right toe, not touching. Krauser's still touching the ground. He's trying to get as much out of the ground as possible, where Walsh and Kovacs have a ton more momentum and they're throwing with speed and less power. Well, they're plenty powerful, don't get me wrong.
So Walsh and Kovacs in this video, and Walsh has always been maybe the fastest thrower that, or among the fastest that we see in the rotation. Kovacs looked particularly fast that day. Are there any things that you do when your athletes are starting to get a degree of technical consistency relative to starting to get them to move faster?
You know, speed, that's a great question. Speed is kind of really the last thing that I really introduce as a concept. If you came to, say, a high school practice, my high school practice, I would say that my advanced best throwers, kind of, you know, returning state qualifier kids, might hear me talk about going faster, you know, week 8, week 9, week 10 of a 13-week season. So maybe a couple of weeks out from conference, we might be introducing the idea of like, I really like where we're at right now. We've got, you know, 1,000, maybe close to 2,000 reps in a high school season. You know, so out of say 2,000 reps in a 13-week season. maybe we're at 1,200, 1,300 going into that 8th week. Okay, let's go a little bit faster. And I'll say, I want you to try 1 mile per hour faster. And if you can get the same positions, let's do that for a little while. And if you can't, guess what? We're going 1 mile per hour slower. We're going right back to what, before I ever said the word, let's try to speed up. You know, I think the classic thing is for kids to know that the ball's going to go further if we go faster, but it's the thing that absolutely ruins technique. And I am constantly thinking longitudinally with our kids. I want them to have really good technique, and I figure that they'll get fast by their senior year and be able to hit really great positions at a fairly good clip. And I'm not willing to really sacrifice that for kind of the short term of like, you know what, if I really let this kid just go off the grid, he might be able to stay in, you know, 1 out of his 3 throws, and I bet it'd be a 2-foot PR. But the risk reward of that, especially rotationally, is they might scratch all 3 throws, and they might scratch all 3 throws for 2 weeks, and then they're kind of crushed mentally, and you're taking steps backwards because you told them to go faster. And so that's not always the case, but I really am cautious with speed. That's my take on it. Ryan Krauser and I talked a lot recently on a podcast talking about you don't have to look like a thrower to throw far, and that's kind of been the underlying theme of this kind of find a technical model, and we kind of arrived at, I think Darrell Hill probably has a simpler, cleaner approach to throwing far, and he's hanging, you know, he's right there with these guys. And so, you know, you look at Walsh, who starts open and is almost, you know, doing more than a full rotation. He's doing like almost like a quarter turn extra. Kovacs is incredibly fast, and the delightful thing about Kovacs is I think he's getting more consistent, where Kovacs used to scratch a lot of throws. He used to scratch all his warm-up throws. You know, as Dan and I, Roger, you were there too at U.S. Nationals, yes, last summer.
No.
Dan and I were there, you know, and I lean over. I was sitting with maybe TJ Crater, Arizona throws coach, and a couple of his throwers, and then Kylie Saban, who's a Minnesota thrower. Peter Miller was sitting with us. We're watching the shot, and they say, who do you like? And I'm like, Hill, Krauser, and John Jones. I was like, you know, Kovacs hadn't done much that season and was inconsistent leading into it. Kovacs crushed every single warm-up throw and stayed in the circle every single warm-up throw. And I'm like, okay, I want to change my thing here. Now Jones came in 4th, I have to say that, but you know, that's the throws though, you know, in terms of speed. Kovacs likes to go fast, and before I think it was kind of risk reward, but now I think he's landing a lot more of those throws. So I hope that continues even after this hiatus. Back to Hill though, I think he has this kind of very streamlined thing where there's nothing outlierish. You know, we looked at Perkovic, who does some, you know, things that are crazy outliers. We didn't look at Adam Nelson. Adam Nelson does some crazy things. Krauser, slow out of the back and then has this kind of glide linear finish. Walsh is opening up a lot more than everybody else and doing kind of this extra quarter turn at the start of the throw and doing it really fast. Hill, I think, is just kind of steady Eddie. You know, he had, you know, 2018 had this series where all 6 of his throws went over 22 meters, and I don't think anyone had ever done that before. Now 2 of them I think ended up being fouls, but they went 22 meters. And you know, I think that Hill is kind of the silent assassin in this group right now, where, you know, he's consistent enough to do some really huge things. And so when I think about, well, who would you show kids? Maybe they can't. Hill's an incredible outlier himself. I'm not underestimating Darrell Hill as an outlier and as kind of a freak. But I think technically he doesn't do anything as exaggerated as some of the other throwers that we've looked at tonight. So I think that's an important thing to think about.
Hey,
Go ahead. Questions.
There's a question here. Talk about when coming out of the back, keeping the left arm over the left leg.
Stacking the left side.
Yeah. So most of the folks that we've looked at here, once they face the throw coming out of the back, their left arm is thrown much further out. So you kind of lose the relationship of the
Right here.
yeah. So
Right.
so how do you discuss that with your kids? How do you coach your kids with on that aspect of the throw?
That is a fantastic question, because I think there's this kind of growing the last couple years. I've heard like use the left arm to create, rotational momentum kind of concept. Is that what you're getting at?
I'm not going to take credit for this question. This is Jim Akins.
Hi, Jim. And so I think there's been little pockets of coaches and some online stuff that, hey, they're creating a lot of rotational momentum with the left arm. And if you go back, I don't have any Ryan Whiting in here, but Ryan Whiting, I just posted a video yesterday. Ryan Whiting and I walked through kind of a whole practice of his from 2013 in between his 2 world championships. And we talked about this concept, because Ryan's left arm kind of stops dead center in the sector. And you can, if we saw this, and this was Ryan Whiting, his hand would be holding this white light right here. And I think that's what Jim's getting at.
He is. He acknowledged that. Yes, you're correct.
Okay, so like cutting off the ring with the left arm, as opposed to letting this left arm keep going. I think, obviously, if we go back to Krauser, he kind of stops it here too, or at least does more so than Hill or Kovacs or Walsh, who I think Walsh has the most left arm action out of those 3 guys. And I think here's what the important thing that Ryan said to me is, the left arm, the left shoulder is a socket, and that arm can do some things for us. But he's much more concerned that if this whole torso had followed the left arm and were pointed off over here somewhere beyond the left sector line, shoulders are actually square to the sector. The left arm happens to be open, but the whole torso hasn't opened. And I think you'd find that as a similarity between all these guys. And so I think some of them do use it to create some rotational momentum. In terms of coaching high school kids, Corinne Franz, who's a coach with me at Throws Club and at Madison Memorial, she was a 2-time state discus champion. We tinkered around with trying to let the left arm be a little bit looser, and she over-rotated every time that the left arm got over-involved in the throw. And so some kids can't handle that extra, like we said, if we simplify Riedel, if we simplify the movement, it's easier to replicate. And so Corinne would kind of like, to throw the discus far, she would literally stop that left arm straight in the middle of the sector, almost like a robot, and then let the right side, kind of catch up to the left arm and get ahead, and then keep going. And so I would say, if I had to make a choice, I would coach my kids to control the left arm to begin with, and then add some nuance or add some extra movement in there, and see if it helps them, move faster, see if it helps them create rotational momentum, but not at the risk of, throwing poorly. It's a good question, Jim, and it's worth tinkering around with both if your kids can handle it. Any other questions in there?
Joe, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Hey,
I like
so
questions.
Joe, you coach large groups of kids?
Yeah, I do. I had 62 throwers at Memorial High School before we got shut down after week 1. So a lot of throwers at the high school level.
Do
And
you
then
have
obviously a
them,
lot of club kids.
do you have them do the same drills?
Yes. So when we do the same drills, like at the beginning of the season, we're lined up like a karate dojo, everyone's like 5 feet apart, but now we'll be 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart in every direction.
Mm-hmm.
In rows and columns. And, if we have, everyone's got a PVC pipe over their shoulder and we're doing 90-degree turns, we're all doing the same drills. As we get to fulls, my younger kids will only hear kind of this one pattern that we're talking about, 90-degree turn, step into the middle of the ring, wheel, right foot turn, triple extension, press your bar above your head, so they're getting this kind of very middle of the road kind of technique that I want them to get lots of reps in. And then as they get older, I think they absolutely have the ability to add some nuance. And I think that's where like style comes into play. But also as we as coaches kind of work the room, we're giving them points of emphasis that kids need to correct or overcorrect for the kids who are suffering or have a weakness or kind of a problem area. And then that develops as either a strength or it continues to be a weakness. And that's what makes our throwers start looking different than the other.
So would you say to a coach, you want to come up with a repertoire, an arsenal of drills to drill the basics,
Yes.
and then be open-minded beyond that, that someone might look a little bit more like Lars Riedel in the long run, someone might look a little bit more like Danny Stevens in the long run, like that? Is that how it plays out?
100%, you know, and I think it goes back to like that concept of like showing kids the reverse early, and then pulling back from it. And then you all of a sudden you find a kid like, man, that kid looks good reversing. That kid's probably going to start reversing than a bunch of the other kids. And then at a meet, they might be reversing, you know, in the second week of discus, you know, rinky-dink dual meet that I don't really care about the results, but hey, why don't we reverse today? You practice it all week. Why don't you throw with reverse at the meet? And then, you know, 3 other kids are like, when am I going to get to reverse? And I'll say, when you understand how to work the ground, you know. And so all of a sudden you start seeing these divergent paths that kids, you know, kind of naturally start showing us or revealing that they can handle a bigger concept. And going back to like Riedel, like how far a kid winds the discus back. You know, they could wind the discus back, you know, 360 degrees, and half of them it's going to bounce back and catch up to their hip, you know, a split second right after they do that. So what's the point of winding it back that far? Let's, you know, simplify it. Let's try a static start where there's no wind at all. You just hold the disc vertically and see if they can focus on, you know, pushing out of the back with the right foot, getting started first. And all of a sudden that kid, it makes sense for that kid, and that's the way they throw at the meet the next day.
So as coaches, we should watch film of all these greats, not necessarily to discover the perfect role model, but to open up our perspective to say, you know what, maybe this thing that Lars Riedel does, maybe if one of my kids starts doing that, maybe that's an okay thing.
And I think experimenting, you know, and then hey, that was a disaster. That exploded in the science lab. You know, then well, let's try a different thing. And I think this video speaks to it a little bit. So I watched The Last Dance. I don't know if anybody watched it. I watched both episodes twice already. I grew up an absolute Chicago sports fanatic in Wisconsin. So, and Michael Jordan like was in my wheelhouse, you know, age range. So this is Bill Cartwright. He was the center for the Bulls' first 3 championships, and by far has the ugliest jump shot in the history of the NBA. He would like pull the ball up above his head and then like turn his wrist. I don't know how the hell he did it. And if we told a kid, hey, why don't you shoot the ball like Bill Cartwright, everyone would laugh. But, you know, that guy's got 3 championship rings, so it worked for him. You know, and at the same time, this is Giannis. And if we said, hey, I want you to go home and I want you to watch Joe Kovacs because you're going to throw like Joe Kovacs. It'd be like telling, you know, your 5'9" kind of, you know, out of shape freshman kid who wished he had come to the weight room all winter before track started, but didn't have shin splints from the warm up from the first day. You know, to say, hey, you're going to rotate or you're going to drop in on the shot and be a reverser, you know, week 2. We can't just say, you know, one thing's going to work for everybody. So I think there's the 2 ends of the spectrum. And so, you know, my takeaways, and I think Dan was getting me there, is basically my ideas continue to change and evolve, and I hope all of yours do. I hope maybe I pushed you in a direction tonight. Maybe you just confirm some things you already know, or maybe you think I'm full of crap. But I hope that as coaches, we're continuing to try to figure out new things. I definitely have figured out that understanding kind of the evolution of these events, the idea that Order influenced Sylvester, and Sylvester influenced Wilkins. Those are important things, and you see the lineage of how these guys adapted and built on what was done before. because if I'm coaching for another 20 years, there's going to be a new set of guys and women that are building off of what Valerie Adams is doing and what Danny Stevens is doing, Kovacs and Walsh and Krauser and Hill have figured out in this era. And so if I were still coaching Randy Madison, I would be upset at myself, and I don't think my kids would be very good. Not because Randy Madison didn't throw far, but because I just think there's more efficient ways that we can get our kids to throw farther now. Figure out what's, say it again.
I got a couple questions here from attendees I want to get before we
close up.
Yeah, so Megan asks, this has to do with the position of the right foot in the middle.
Sure.
So at right foot touchdown.
Let's find a throw.
Multi-part question here. This is a multi-part question, so let me get it all out. At right foot touchdown, where do you want to see your kids throw it, and where might the ideal or the elite throwers have the toe pointing? And then where does the right foot point when you get left foot touchdown?
Got it. This is a tricky question because everyone's going to be different. And when we get these guys, oh, why did it do that? Stop doing that. Go back, sorry. When we get these guys there, let's see if we can find out what these guys do at right foot touchdown. You know, the way I coach my kids is I would really like them to be somewhere between, probably 9 o'clock would be great if this is 9 o'clock on your clock, or if this is 3 o'clock, okay, the hash mark on the left side of the ring. I would love to be right foot touchdown there, and then anywhere in between here and the back of the ring would be fantastic. And, you know, if you took Krauser, here he is, right foot touchdown, pointing almost exactly at the side. You got Kovacs pointing almost exactly at the back, and you have Walsh right foot touchdown pointing at the back. I don't think many high school kids do this. In fact, Andrew Stone, who just had the farthest throw in Wisconsin state history last year, through 68 feet. He's a freshman at Wisconsin, throwing for Davis Strauskis. He's a Badger now. He was the first really, the high school kid that I saw do this consistently, where the right foot would land pointing at the back or slightly more. And the reason being, I think the further this right foot turns before right foot touchdown, the harder it is to keep the shot back. And the shot's a little bit easier than keeping the discus back. And so I think if you had a typical discus throw and you landed the right foot here, that the discus would be like way down here somewhere rather than way up here high. And so I think having them be more aggressive, turning the right foot on the way, you know, through entry would be a great thing to have them do. But I think left side hash mark would be a great place for them to touch down, and then anything further would be bonus as long as they can keep the implement back.
And then how does it look at left foot touchdown?
So it's going to keep turning, and all these guys are, you know, turning on the ball of the foot. And so, you know, here's kind of your classic power position where the right toe is pointed at the right hash mark. Now, you would think that all these guys would have their shoulders, you know, square to the back of the ring like a glider does, but rotators are almost always going to be open. Walsh's speed, he's probably always the most open here. Here's left foot touchdown, and he's already looking at the throw, and his left arm's pointed straight out. I'd say that Krauser looks, like we've been talking about, looks the most like shoulders back, because he's trying to create this kind of leave the ball back and be linear here. And then Kovacs is somewhere in between, but pretty darn close to what Krauser's doing. But the toe, yeah, here. And if we were gliders, I'd hope all these guys' chests would be facing us right now.
And another question, Dean asks, how do you keep high school kids from over-rotating coming out of the back?
Well, we kind of talked, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that I have tried to keep kids from doing that. A couple of them happened on the ground right away. Went too far back. If you look just at this freeze frame, a lot of rotating high school kids, as they're sweeping the right foot, they'll keep rotating the left toe. And so all of a sudden the left toe will be pointed here or here. So it keeps rotating. And we need to stop the left foot. Left foot, you know, you'll see pros, some of them will stop the left foot pointing down the right sector line. Some of them, like Krauser here, will stop straight down dead center. But if this left toe keeps rotating, they are going to over-rotate to the left. The other thing I think is this concept we were talking about before with the left arm. If the left arm stops, they have a better chance of kind of sprinting down the ring. And when I think sprint, you know, on the discus, I'm really trying to drive across the ring because I got a bigger circle. I'm trying to create a bigger path for the discus. And the shot, I'm just trying to get my right foot ahead of me, get the left foot down in the front. And so, but I want to do that linearly. The left arm, yes, has something to do with that, but really trying to keep the chest square or present to the sector, almost exaggeratedly all the way through right foot touchdown. And if we go ahead, it's too far, sorry about that. You know, here, chest trying to present, Kovacs as well. Get in here somewhere. I think a lot of times kids can do too much with the left arm right away, or even the head out of the back of the ring. And so that's what I was looking for. Right now, a lot of kids, their head will be way over the left shoulder and their left arm will already be in the ring. So this stacked left side, they'll start leaning into the ring. The left arm will already be ahead of them. And then the right leg is inevitably behind and their chest will be ahead of them. And usually the head, left arm, or chest is creating over rotation if it's not that left toe out of the back. Anything else?
Yeah, Andrew asks, do you believe that Tom Walsh's style is going to represent the next significant advancement in the rotational technique?
That wider open stance at the start. I'm guessing that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, I know that a lot of throwers have started tinkering around with that. There was another guy, an Australian thrower. He threw at UCLA and it was a discus guy.
Ruck.
Yeah, Julian Ruck. And he started with that extra 90-degree open at the start. You know, from a pro standpoint, you know, I think I'm going to guess that a lot of people have tinkered around with that as they see, you know, Walsh have success with that. I think a lot of people aren't doing it because, again, it adds another variable and you just screw things up. And so, you know, Ruck was very successful at it. I think he won an NCAA championship. He might have thrown maybe 216 or 215 or something like that, discus in college.
I think
and that's a big throw.
I think he might have been mid 220s.
Yeah. I mean, he threw really far with that technique. But, you know, now we're talking, that was 8 or so years ago. I don't see Ruck as a factor at the net, you know, at the world level necessarily currently. And I don't see a lot of other throwers doing it. And I think probably because people have tinkered around with it and it's hard to replicate, hard to.
A lot of timing involved.
Yeah, timing and balance, and you add that extra 90 degrees and, you know, it's amazing. I think the discus is crazy. And, you know, there's a little bit of success or a little bit of duplication is, I think, a little bit more present in the shot because the ball's with you on your center of access. But add another turn with the discus and have to think about separation for a longer amount of time. So I know the question was about rotational shot, but I think people will try it because they saw him throw 2290. Can they replicate it? I don't know.
You know, as much as I admired him as a thrower, it would have been difficult for me to advocate anyone adopt Adam Nelson's style. But when you think about the degree to which he's wrapped and Walsh is wrapped, they're similar in that regard. They don't look the same going through the ring, but they both have kind of extreme wraps.
Lothar Altmaier, who is like one of the lead German youth coaches and has spent quite quite a bit of time in Wisconsin. He's got a good throws coach friend, Jeff Steinbach, who's kind of instrumental in our state association, and a great coach himself. Him and Lothar have a long-standing relationship, and Lothar's been back and talked at our clinic. And I kind of needled him on the Germans sticking with the glide as long as they've stuck. And they say not anymore. There's a secret movement that I think we're going to see more German rotators now that especially once Sturl retires. And he said a lot of people think that trying to do what Nelson is doing, maybe not the same way Nelson is doing it, but the exaggerated kind of wrapping position is something that the Germans thought physiologically was really interesting. So to hear someone, who obviously is rubbing elbows with kind of, a system of sport, the way Europeans run track and field differently from us. It's interesting to hear that those minds think that that's a good thing, Roger. You're onto something there. Hard to replicate what Nelson does.
I think that's all I've got from here.
Well, hey, here's my stuff. If you guys have questions, I'm happy to answer questions, either email address. You can follow MTC Throwers on Twitter, or Throw Big Throw Far on Instagram. The YouTube channel, I think currently there's 20 discus throws in the technical model playlist for discus. I think there's 20 rotational shot putters. I think there's 16 gliders. Gliders are getting a little harder to come by. But again, all of those videos kind of have that same rhythm, 100%, 50%, 25% with stops at the same thing. And so to be able to kind of develop a common language with my throwers and then be able to share a link and they'll see something similar and it pause at the same thing. It's nice to have kind of a similar, vocabulary, at least a visual library. And so that's what I've utilized that for. And I encourage, if coaches think that would be helpful, to use that the same way. You can find that on YouTube at Madison Throws Club. And check out the podcast. Dan, thanks for hitting that up. If there's young coaches out there, throwbigthrowfar.com is the membership site, and there's tons of content on there, plus video analysis that I do for a lot of kids. And then coaches will also kind of hey, coach, what do you think? Tell me what you think. I've got this kid and I'm stuck. I do the same thing with coaches that I'm friends with, and it's nice to get a second opinion. So if that would help anybody, go to throwbigthrowfar.com. Thank you so much, Dan and Roger, for having me, and I hope this was helpful to the folks out there.
Fantastic. Coach Frontier, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please check out mcthrows.com. As I mentioned earlier, next Thursday, we're going to have Coach Viestein Hofsteinison. He's going to break down the technique of the world champion of the discus, Daniel Stahl. So check out mcthrows.com for registration on that. Hang in there, everybody. Someday we're going to all be back out with our throwers at the rings and enjoying every minute. Coach Frontier, thank you so much.
A pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to bid you good night and hope you'll join us again next week. Thank you.